Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Amity Gaige to discuss Sea Wife, a smart, sophisticated literary page-turner about a young family who escapes suburbia for a year-long sailing trip that upends all of their lives. Amity Gaige is the author of 3 previous novels, Oh My Darling, The Folded World, and Schroder, which was shortlisted for the Folio Prize in 2014. Amity is the recipient of many awards for her previous novels, including Forward Book of the Year Award for 2007, and in 2006 she was named one of the 535 outstanding emerging writers by the National Book Foundation. She has a Fulbright and a Guggenheim Fellowship and residencies at MacDowell and Yaddo. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Megha Majumdar, the author of last year's sensational debut, A Burning. Megha was born and raised in Calcutta, India. She moved to the United States to attend college at Harvard University, followed by graduate school in social anthropology at Johns Hopkins University. She works as an editor at Catapult. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And you can order your copy of Sea Wife from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
So great to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Christina. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are celebrating the paperback of Sea Wife. I have the hardcover, but I read Sea Wife last summer and I flew through it. It was completely transporting. I'd been stuck in Brooklyn for months at that point. I've still not left New York, but this book took me on this sailing adventure to places that I've never been, Panama, Colombia. And this book immersed me in the life of this family on a boat in their great expedition in which many things go wrong, but also for all the writers in the room. And I know there must be many of us. This book is a masterclass in writing not just life at sea, but also emotional precision, variation, tension. I learned so much from reading this book. That's probably enough from me. Amity, would you like to describe the book in your own words? And then we'll jump into the reading, which is a little unusual.
That was such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. It makes me want to go buy the book. It's fabulous to appear with you. I mean, A Burning was one of my favorite books of last year, and I know there are people here who I definitely want to talk about Sea Wife, but are also here to see you and to learn from you, and as I did from reading A Burning. So I will jump into my summary and we'll do a reading, and I'm so thrilled to be able to read with you. If you haven't read Sea Wife, it's got 2 voices, and it's actually got 3, but they rotate back and forth quite a lot. So you can see they're rather closely intertwined, braided, and it's very hard to read the text by oneself. So I have cast Megha as my husband, Michael, and I'll be reading the part of Julia. This is so fun, such an honor. So before we read together, I will just say it's a book about a family, as you said, who goes on a sailing adventure in an effort to reconnect with one another as a married couple, but also to escape some things. The wife, Juliet's postpartum depression, among other things, take their 2 children. One is 2 and one's 7, on this year-long journey, and all of its joys and sorrows. So we're just starting at the beginning. So there's really not much more to say. Where does a mistake begin? Lately, I've found this simple question difficult. Impossible, actually. A mistake has roots in both time and space, a person's reasoning and her whereabouts. Somewhere in the interaction of those two dimensions is the precisely bounded mistake. In nautical terms, its coordinates. Did my mistake begin with the boat? Or my marriage itself? I don't think so. I now suspect that my mistake took root in an innocent experience I forgot to decipher, the mystery of which has quietly ruled me. For example, I remember standing beside a blindingly blue Howard Johnson's motel pool at 12 years old, watching a couple undress one another through a half-drawn curtain, while my estranged father disputed the bill in the lobby. Should I have looked away? Did the miscalculation occur even earlier as I sat on a rope rug in clean kindergarten sunlight and I leaned toward the boy beside me and accepted his insistent whisper? I still feel his dew in my ear. And now I'm sitting in a closet, Michael's closet. I should explain. Several days ago, I came in here looking for something of his and discovered that the carpet is very plush. The slatted bifold doors filter the sunlight beautifully. I feel calm in here. Hiding in closets is the habit of children, I know. I used to hide in my mother's closet when I was a kid. Her closet contained some dressy silks and wools she never wore. I loved holding these fabrics against my body or stepping into her high heels as if onto a dais, rehearsing my future. I never felt ashamed. Surely there's some connection between seeking refuge in my mother's closet long ago and hiding in Michael's now, but that insight does not help me. Sometimes life just writes you tiny, awful poems. To be honest, I'm uncertain whether or not I can survive this day. I mean, if I want to. To go outside requires preparation and composure. If I were to go out, to start walking around and seeing people again and going to the grocery store and getting on with it, invariably what someone would ask me is, do you regret the journey? Was the journey your mistake? But I do not regret saying yes to the boat. Saying yes to the boat was my clearest act of loyalty toward my husband. I can't afford to regret it. If I did, I would only be left with my many disloyalties.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to read from the husband's log of the boat. January 17th, 10:15 a.m., log of yacht Juliet. From Porvenir towards Cayos Limones, 9 degrees, 33.5 minutes north, 78 degrees, 56.98 minutes west. Northwest wind 10 knots. Seas 2 to 4 feet. Notes and remarks. We are 102 nautical miles east-northeast of Panama City, catching prevailing winds into the sovereign territory of San Blas. The shape of the coast is still visible behind us, but ahead is just water, nothing but water. That's when I realize there's only one ocean. One big mother ocean. Yes, there are bays and seas and straits, but those are just words, artificial divisions. Once you're out here, you see there's just one unbroken country of water. You never feel this way on land, not in our country. What a feeling. Generations of sailors have failed to describe it. So what are my chances? Me, Michael Partlow, who can't tell you the title of a single poem. Just ask my wife. Her head is full of them.
When I first met him, I thought I'd never marry a guy like that. Too persnickety, too conventional, no sense of humor. But I was wrong. Marriage and kids and the grind made Michael morbidly funny. He got funnier and funnier, while I, who had been funny, got less funny. There was this ratty muscle shirt to which he was superstitiously attached while we were living aboard the boat. The memory of this shirt makes me laugh out loud. While sailing in hot climates, you start wearing as little as possible. And cruising kids, they dress like lunatics, wearing grass skirts under flamenco dresses with muck boots and shell necklaces, mementos of places they've been. I have no idea where Michael got the muscle shirt. Panama City? Standing ashore, beaming, with his boyish face and unwashed hair, he looked like a prep school kid who'd gotten lost on a hike 20 years ago.
The crew of our vessel is fit and in good spirits. Names and titles are the following. Bosun Sybil Partlow, age 7. Deckhand George Doodle Partlow, almost 3. First mate Juliet Partlow, and me, the captain. The deckhand is doing his best to stand upright in the small swell. He's pantsless, begging first mate to let him whiz off the side of the boat. His growing vocabulary is strictly maritime. Fish go, boat go. A very large sea turtle just surfaced portside, head like a periscope. Sybil says it's a spy. Whenever Sybil says anything cute, she tells me to write it down. That turtle's a spy. Write that down in your book, Daddy. Pardon me, I say. Are you speaking to me? What do you call me underway, bosun? She laughs. Okay, write that down in your book, Captain.
The muscle shirt was so funny because he's normally such a neatnik, a dandy, and a rearranger. He needs almost no sleep. His mother said he'd always been that way. Here at the house, he used to work late into the night, sending emails and finishing reports, but mostly man tinkering, learning about electrical wiring by gutting another appliance or making little toys for the kids. In the morning, he'd leave for work as shiny as an apple. He wouldn't let the children eat in his commuting car. Goldfish, Triscuits, verboten. But the family car, my car, lawless. A layer of organic material composted under the seats. Mysterious objects thumped against the wheel wells whenever I made a sharp turn. I understand it now, sitting here. I understand how nice it must have been for him to have a little fiefdom, a closet where the shoes are paired and the world is shut out, and you get to make all your own choices. My closet, just there on the other side of our bedroom, is haphazard. I gave up trying to neaten it when Sybil was a toddler. After months of hanging them up, I just left all the blouses on the floor where she'd pulled them off hangers. She'd shuffle out of the closets in my shoes, unsteady as a drunk, and leave them under tables and sofas. But I'm a mother. Gradually, I just gave them all away, all my spaces, one by one, down to the very last closet.
You learn a lot about people when you tell them you're going to sea with your kids. About 10% of them will say, hey, that's amazing, Godspeed. And the other 90% won't hesitate before telling you why it's impossible. Then they want you to spend a couple hours walking them back, explaining how you are going to get food or take a shower or keep up with the news. Everyone was worried about the kids. How could you do this with kids, they asked. Aren't you worried about their safety? What if they fall overboard? What if they miss home? Why not wait until they're 18? Why not wait until you're retired? But isn't there something wrong with the line of thought that it's reasonable to defer your modest dream for several decades? What are we, characters in a Greek myth, waiting for the eagle who comes to eat our liver every day because in a Greek myth that's normal? I know it appears that what we're doing is radical, but the truth is there are so many people out here, sailboats, sloops, catamarans, replicas of famous schooners, wealthy paranoids, retirees, people traveling with cats, people traveling with lizards, people sick of giving 1/4 of their income to the government, free spirits, charlatans, and yes, children.
Let me begin by saying that buying a boat was the most absurd idea I'd ever heard. I'd never boarded anything but a ferry in my life, and Michael hadn't sailed since he was in college. You've got to be kidding me, I said to him. You want me and our 2 little kids to live on a boat with you in the middle of the sea? Just for a year, he said. Of course I said no. My first reaction was shock. I thought he'd lost his mind. Me and the kids living on a boat? He might as well have said, let's live upside down and walk on the ceiling. But I wasn't only talking about the implausible plan to walk away from our house and the kids' schools and Michael's job. I was asking whether we were to go or to stay, what would we do about us? You think this will solve all our problems. It's magical thinking, Michael. It's the way a child thinks.
We talked a lot about practicalities, but the usual subject was off limits. So, like many a brave husband before me, I dropped hints. Did she know, I ventured to ask, that the ancient Romans believed that sea voyages could cure depression? Juliet would only glare at me. One night in bed, I just decided to be honest. Juliet, I said, look, it's been years since I've seen you happy. You want to stay here in Connecticut and be depressed and not finish your dissertation? That's your end game. Maybe this would be good for you. I'm not depressed, she said. Besides, I hate that word. Okay, what should we call it? She fluffed the pillow behind her back indignantly. She said, I'm very loyal to my problems.
I do know a lot of poems from all those hours in my carrel at Boston College trying to write my dissertation before we moved out to the land of steady habits. Ironically, one reason I gave up studying poetry is because it seemed brutally impractical compared to the urgencies of raising 2 children. But these days inside my closet, poetry is as real to me as an axe. I need it more than food. Lines come and go in my mind. I don't even remember who wrote them. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they are won. I eat very little, mostly just dinner with the kids, and I lap from the bathroom tap when I'm thirsty. During the day, when I have to leave the closet, I push open the doors and cross our carpeted bedroom in my socks. The body creaks, the bladder longs. I avoid the bathroom mirror. When I return to our bedroom, sometimes I linger by the front windows, where birds mob our blighted apple tree, not realizing they can be nakedly seen through the leafless branches. I spy on them, just as the occasional curious neighbor spies on me. Our plain white house is now a point of interest. It's been on the news. I see the way people walking past our house slow down, and how, if in pairs in the evening, they exchange a somber look. Vivas to those who have failed, and to those whose war vessels sank in the sea, and to those themselves who sank in the sea. It's true, history is written by the victors. That's why we need poets, to sing of the defeats. Thank you.
That was beautiful, and that was so much fun. Thank you for inviting me to do it with you.
You read that so well. Thank you. I love it. It's really amazing to hear you voice that and make the words like the words new to me. And the emphasis of the way you read it was wonderful. Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Let's start with, a very straightforward question. How did you come to the idea for this book?
Well, there's so many different ways to answer that. I think that probably the most honest answer is that I just had this dream of writing a book set at sea. I like to describe things. I really enjoy trying to put the words on things, especially there's nothing more marvelous, dramatic, and changing than the sea. And I've always had, I think, probably pretty common romantic ideas about it. But I often, as a writer, will look around for a story and kind of grab it from somewhere else. And in this case, I was contemplating already a family with children sailing together, and found around that time an article about a family who had done that and had gotten into trouble. They were crossing the South Pacific, which is a very, very big sea, and one of their kids got sick and they needed a Coast Guard rescue. And it was a controversial story at the time because like taxpayers didn't want to pay for the rescue. But I learned in the course of all of my research that there's a lot of people who do this, and there's a lot of people who, if not at sea in other places, in raising their children in unconventional ways, or spending time at sea or in off the map in other places. I've always been very interested in that choice that people make, and especially with children. Mm-hmm. And so you contrast life at sea with Connecticut. They're quite opposite, where I am in Connecticut, and a kind of a semi-suburban townish place. So that's where I started, the sea plus the story. How did those people get there? Why were they out there with children? What does it feel like? It's inherently dramatic to just put people on a boat. As soon as you put people on a boat and you push them away from shore, you've got yourself a story.
I love it. For anybody who's just joining us now, we're chatting about Amity's novel Sea Wife, which I'm holding the hardcover, but this is out in paperback now. Please get it from Books and Books. And also, we will take your questions in a few minutes. So please put your question in the Ask a Question box whenever a question comes to you. We'll see them soon. So I read that when you started writing this book, you yourself had no or little sailing experience. What was the process of gaining that authority? Because one of the things that I love in this book is the fluency in, I don't even know what to call it, boat vocabulary.
Yes, nautical jargon. Yes. Boat vocabulary. Well, there's so much boat vocabulary. There's hundreds and hundreds of terms, and they're so weird. Like breastplate, and chock and cleat. I mean, they're just binnacle. Like, these are things you couldn't guess what they are. You could not guess what these things are. So I did have to learn a kind of a vocabulary for sure. I do not have sailing experience other than a couple trips here and there, but I wasn't raised in any kind of sailing family. It was ambitious / absurd, ridiculous to try and write a novel, a nautical book story. But there was something in that for me. I had to go on the journey, the same journey as my characters, a difficult journey. And that difficult journey for me was writing and researching the book. And I started by reading memoirs of people who lived at sea, sailors. I love anyone describing beautiful nautical novels as well, and some of the classics of the genre. And I studied a lot. I got a 12-bolt Bible, and I tried to understand how a boat is put together. And there was a certain point that I got to where it just became clear to me that I could no longer just read about this. I had to actually feel it and experience it. And so that's when I told my husband that I needed to go, and on a trip to the Caribbean, I had decided to set it in the San Blas Islands because I had seen them years previously, and they were as close to any kind of untouched, paradise as I had ever seen. I wanted to set them there. So as soon as I said I need to go to the Caribbean for research by myself, he's like, sounds fishy. He's like, sure you do. And my friends, they were all like, what a scam. You're just... But the truth is, actually, I was a very difficult trip, and nobody believed me. It was really until I came back and told the story, because I enrolled in a sailing course. So it was and actually I have an article coming out in LitHub very soon. I think it's next week, and it's just it's a humorous piece about how hard this trip was. But I took a sailing course. There were only 3 other students and the captain, and it sort of everything went wrong, basically in the course, and even the captain eventually admitted that. And but I did experience, at least one major storm while I was there. I thought I was in Grenada, and it's a small island nation, sort of on the eastern rim of the Caribbean. And I just thought that because it wasn't hurricane season, I really wouldn't run into weather, but that's ridiculous. So that's ignorant. And so I learned a lot running into that storm, and all of the sensations. For example, the heel of a boat and how it feels to be at, sailing at a heel, and the pressure of that. It's like kind of taking a turn in like a really fast car. I could not have read that. Where could you read that in a book? Like being at heel is like taking a turn in a fast car, or the sound that the wind makes when at high speeds. Certainly the sound in the rigging it's like really like almost an instrument. None of these things can be really found in books, except for other people who are, can describe every once in a while something, but never comprehensively. So it was very valuable to take that trip, and it was humbling. I failed the course.
Oh no. Oh my God. But I bet you're the only one who came back and wrote a gorgeous novel.
I'm the only one who wrote a novel.
So this book, it takes on a lot of things. A central focus is, of course, this marriage. We're reading about this couple who have different political leanings. That's just part of the difficulty of their marriage. And you've written about marriage before. I'm so curious about what drew you to write about this particular shape of this marriage. What excited you about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't, I every once in a while become self-conscious when I have like 4 novels that now one can quite easily look at them and psychoanalyze me. You can hide behind one, but then you're not 4. But I think that there are common themes in a lot of my books, and certainly the intimacy of marriage it's a really interesting like theater for me. I don't use that word lightly at all. Like I'm also interested in identity, and whether identity is created or inborn, or does it change? How does it influence one? Can one run from it? So those things kind of came together, I would say, here. But the marriage is quite important to the book, as listeners heard, how it's really almost a dialogue between the two. And I wrote it almost to be like a long married couple telling the same story. And in telling the same story, you hear a lot of contradictions. And there's sometimes when they also pair up. And then there's sometimes when they are critical of one another. They each land some pretty good criticisms about one another, and about one another's political beliefs as well, which, as you said, stresses their marriage a good deal. And then there are moments when they're quite sympathetic to one another, where it seems like the act of telling the story, even though Michael is not technically present, where that telling the story together has a therapeutic or cathartic, it fosters the intimacy that they didn't have in the moment. And I don't want to give too much away, but of course they kind of lose their chance to work it out. And but in this telling, and in Michael's case, the writing in the journal, his honest thoughts in the journal, and Juliet's reading the journal and contemplating it, is as a kind of achievement of a sympathy for one another that I think is quite necessary in a marriage and in a political dialogue. Both. That's how that sort of probably comes back together for me. The importance of dialogue, talking, saying what you need to say while you can, and trying to find common ground, trying to understand one another. So since that was already at work in the book, and then we had our very quite tumultuous, number of years here as a country, and the polarization in the country was something that really was caused me a lot of pain, and I wanted to. I think a novelist should absorbed or be influenced by her moment in time. And so when I was writing my story of my troubled marriage, I was like, oh my God, look, they have temperamental differences. They also, that are clearly also, you could kind of engineer into these political differences, and I do feel like there's some temperamental differences in our political philosophies that are related to some of our ideas about individualism. And I noticed that Michael had been very much like he's an American individualist. We're good at that, and we do that, and there's wonderful things about that, And Juliet's, but like, what about others? What about me? What about the family? What about these other ideas? And so it quite naturally spun into them taking kind of opposite political sides. And then I think for me, there was a personal, now again, like with the burning, like I don't say he's a Republican, she's a Democrat. I don't name things. I don't say Trump. I don't say any of these things. I simply sort of kind of express the difficulty of two people with differences attempting to sail the boat safely together, as we do as this country, and whether we like each other or not, we're in the same boat, So that seemed to me an obvious allegory. And again, it's politics. I reread the book myself recently to try to like remember it, because it's been a while, and I was noticing that like their political differences come in and out of the book in terms of importance, but it's there. And I think for me personally, as a writer, I was also trying to, since I tend to see things more like Juliet does, it was a little bit more of a challenge to write Michael. But I was challenging myself to see if I could do that in seriousness and take him at give some merit to his ideas. So I needed to find some places where we did agree, and I found them. And so that was personally useful for me, to just put myself in his shoes and to walk that walk, even though it was like uncomfortable. And if can I ask you something about that too? Because
Sure.
I feel like this is something, writing a character with some moral failings, and I'm not saying Michael has moral failings because of his politics. He has moral failings in other ways, but it reminded me it was hard to do that. It took a person, it was costive, to try and imagine my way into him, even though I think it was quite good, and that he ends up becoming a useful vehicle for meaning. But with your character, you have a character named P.T. Sir, who I really think is my favorite character in the book, like not because he's a great person. So in Megha's book, P.T. Sir is the teacher of a woman who ends up being accused of a crime she doesn't commit. And he at first feels quite sad about it, because he kind of loved her in the teacherly way. And then later on, he totally like sells out for his own selfish purposes. In an unrelated way, he becomes part of a nationalist, a sort of violent nationalist political party. And I was just wondering if you had a journey in terms of writing about a character. Obviously, they took effort for you to understand P.T. Sir's journey and how he could end up in that position, starting as somebody who's not obviously villainous in any way. So you go on a journey in terms, did he start as a villain to you, and then you grew to see more humanity in him, or is he really a villain and I'm misreading it?
No, I mean, thank you for reading so thoughtfully and with so much care. That character, I never wanted to write a villain. I always wanted to write somebody who's just this ordinary teacher. He just feels that his life is not very significant. He feels that his students don't respect him. They're always trying to get out of gym class. And from that place of feeling slightly rejected and slightly alienated, he sees what it would be like to gain some political power. And then he has to find his moral center. I was very interested in that question of how does a person in this society find a moral center? What do they decide can be sacrificed? And what do they decide is fundamental to who they are? So that was kind of how I wanted to write him. I'm glad you didn't read him as a villain. But for anybody who's just catching up, we're talking about Sea Wife, and please put your questions in the Ask a Question button right at the bottom of the screen. So what we were talking about makes me think about, the structure of this novel, which I really loved, and I hope that our reading provided a taste of it. How did you come to that structure?
Yeah. I think that okay. So we know what there's 7 plots, or there's something like there's very few plots. We are telling the same plot, but we can find infinite ways of telling those 7 plots. And so anyone who's writing a novel knows that it's really the story is just a tiny part of it. Really, you have to find the way to tell it. And I decided, I think that once I started hearing these people's voices, I didn't know quite who they were or what their problem was, but they started saying some funny, snarky things about like the suburban milieu that I work. It was actually really great to make fun of it a bit. And so I started hearing these voices, and I decided I wasn't going to try to put them together in a neat way. I decided I wasn't going to try to write a straightforward novel in which, I would have long chapters of exposition that would follow kind of causally one to the next, that I would let the characters, their voices drive the book, and that I wouldn't write anything that bored me.
That is a great resolution.
I don't know why. I feel like I admire books that are conventionally written with those very long chapters of exposition. I enjoy them, but it just I wasn't feeling it. I was like, I want to just say what feels honest and immediate to these characters, and I don't want to write this connective material. So I didn't. So I put them all in one big file, all the things they said, and then I threw in that. I call this book my kitchen sink cookie book. I don't know if you've ever had a kitchen sink cookie, but it's like M&Ms and pretzels and nuts. And so I threw everything into this document, and into that also went anything that interested me that was happening in the moment, culturally or artistically. If I read something that I admired, poetry that I was reading, and I just threw that in there. Lines that would come to me in the middle of the night. Yeah. Lines my children said, especially my daughter. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she would say adorable, weird things, and I would just write those down and just throw those right into the novel. So that this document grew and grew, and then I had to find out how to order it. And that was when I did start writing some more exposition. What I read tonight, the very first section where Juliet is reflecting, that took me a while to get to. So the bits were there first, like these little like pithy, immediate bits and observations are what drove the novel for me. And then I kind of put it, I had to find that sort of plot scaffolding afterwards.
Wow.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
And does this mean that the children's voices in the book, I feel like children's voices are so hard to do in a way that is, bright and lively, but not kind of overly sweet. And the children's voices here feel so truthful. So I was going to ask you, what was your process for writing these children? Were you just kind of stealing what your daughter was saying?
Yeah, sheer plagiarism. Yep. I mean, I have a really interesting little girl, and she, all kids do say really interesting stuff, especially when they're trying to say something that an adult would find interesting. The way they misspeak is hilarious. Cape Cold instead of Cape Cod. It's just funny, cinnamon instead of cinnamon. And like, I just would put those things in, and they lent the writing authenticity because they were authentic. And then I built on top of that. Of course, I did have to imagine my way into Sybil. She's not my daughter. And I had to imagine my way into her. She went through a trauma at sea too. So, but I wouldn't have been able, I don't think I would have been able to do Sybil without that reality. Yeah, there. Yeah, but the form, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, so we've talked quite a bit about, how much work went into the book, including very difficult trip to the Caribbean. But what did you find most enjoyable in writing this?
Wow, that's a great question. I really liked the opportunity to, I think make two characters come to a kind of peace together by imagining my way into both of them. I think that was personally useful for me throughout these number of years. And I also enjoyed the puzzle of putting the book together, the very thing I was just talking about, which of course was just a hot mess, basically. I enjoyed ordering that. And there was play there for me. And I hope that energy comes through for the reader, that it's certainly not a straightforward novel, but there's a playful form about it. That was really fun for me. And also, I didn't really have any models. Like, I don't know any other book that's written kind of exactly that way. I mean, there are many plays written like that. So the form was really interesting for me. And I mean, for me, if I can ask you another question, because I think your book and my book have a lot in common that way. I mean, like you could have told your story in a very straightforward way. I don't know what that would have looked like, but I can imagine. But you didn't either. You decided to break it up into short chapters. You have maybe 4 or 5 main, maybe fewer, voices that you feature, and you kind of move. It seems not random, but sort of improvise your way through those voices. So why didn't you tell your story in a straightforward manner?
I think I was trying to write the most complex book I could write. And for me, that meant thinking about how do I make sure that I'm not telling a simplistic story? How do I make sure that I'm punching depths into the text whenever possible? How do I make sure that I write about this world which feels like a rich, busy fictional world where even though I'm choosing to follow these particular characters, the reader feels aware that there are all of these other possible characters that I could have followed, So just trying to make sure that nobody in the book functions as a device or, a way to prop up a different character or, move plot forward, that I provide room for the reader to think about how every person in the book, every character in the book has their own worries and jokes and superstitions and, things that they care about. So that was part of, having all of these different voices in it. I don't know what a straightforward, because the book is so much about asking questions for me, so I don't know that a straightforward telling would have enabled me to ask questions. I think it would have forced me to occupy a position of authority or judgment over these characters that I didn't really want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. It like decentered the story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. There's this wonderful quote from Flannery O'Connor. She's referring to, oh my gosh, who is it? It's Henry James. So she says, like, he used to write, people would ask him to read their work, and he would respond sometimes when he didn't like what he read. He would say, "You have chosen a good subject and are treating it in a straightforward manner." And people are pleased with that. But really, like what he was saying is like, often like a good subject, really like a straightforward manner isn't a match for the complications of a subject.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's kind of what I think you were saying, and what A Burning does. It comes up with the form that's as complicated as the subject you're, right?
Yeah, I tried. I love what you said about play, because, some of my favorite sections in Sea Wife are, like, I'm thinking about this section where the family, and this is very minor, it's not giving anything away for everybody watching, but they meet this stranger who lives in a shack in this region of mangroves, and they kind of learn about the forest there. And something about that section is so magical. It's so full of discovery. It's full of that thrill of meeting a kind stranger, that good feeling. I loved it. And it felt like a place where the book was playing and giving into, its sense of joy. It was so wonderful.
Thank you. I'm not sure anyone's ever brought that section up with me. I really love that guy who's like the chief of a town, but there's no one else there, right? Yeah.
So speaking of craft questions, you teach currently. You teach at Yale, which we were chatting about. Can I ask you to share one craft lesson that you teach your students?
Oh no.
This is just me trying to learn.
I didn't see that coming. I'm not teaching this semester, and it's so funny how because we're all in our little holes, like I've forgotten things. But so one of the first assignments I give them is I give them each a poem, and I say, write a short story from this poem. So you just take any, and I pick poems that I think have a sort of narrative potential, but they come up with amazing stories, whether it's just borrowing a line from the poem, or the voice of speaking, the persona that's speaking the poem, or the title or an image of the poem. And they start writing fiction that way. And I was like, and I think one thing it shows is just how generative the mind really is. We need someone to give us a little push or a little idea or a little structure. And then how fertile the imagination. I actually think it's infinite. I think it's the only thing in our lives that's infinite is our imagination. So they sort of see that, in that already. And it's not hard for them to generate. Yeah. And I have a bunch of others.
I love that, and infinite imagination. So I'm going to encourage everybody watching to get a copy of Sea Wife from Books and Books. You have time to click the green button, so I really encourage you to do it. It is so transporting if you've been stuck at home, like so many of us have been. It's just a beautiful book to be immersed in. And also, we are here for your questions. So there's the Ask a Question button. Feel free to drop your question in there, and we'll see it right away.
I have one for you too, if that's okay. Unless
Sure.
like I'm jumping on things, I don't know. But I wanted to. Can I ask you about the term literary thriller? I don't know. This concept of a thriller. Okay, now you work in publishing too, so like there's also you're intimate with these genres and these terms. But I was wondering if you had any. I think there's even the word thriller is used in your jacket copy, but like to me, and I had a kind of complicated experience with that too, in the sense of some people like thought that it was a thriller, called it a literary thriller, which there's nothing. I think it's beautiful that people think it's thrilling. But do you have? Was that at all your intention? And do you have a complicated relationship with that term?
That's a great question. I see it as a compliment. If somebody calls my book a literary thriller, I think that's great. Part of my intention was to see if I could write a book that is intellectually serious, but is really fun to read. I thought a lot about what would that look like, because I didn't want to write this kind of dry text, which is, about, political opinions rather than story. I very much wanted to write a story that somebody could, come home from work and pick up and read and be immersed in. So, and those all come down to craft questions, right? Like, what can we do? What can I do as the writer to invite my reader in on every page. And if that results in a kind of thrill, if that results in a sense of, oh, I have to turn the page and see what happens in the next chapter, then I'll be completely, happy about it. But I also think that so many of these labels are perhaps brought by readers. So when I was writing it, I didn't think I want to write a thriller. I thought I just want to write, a book that makes room for the reader and invites them in. So that was something that I tried to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What is your relationship with literary thriller? Because I can see that applied here.
I agree that it was something maybe more that readers kind of put on it, and the only problem there is that then there's sometimes expectations that get set up, and then they're like, oh, it's a thriller, and then I stop and talk about politics or helicopter parenting or poetry and all of these other things that actually I think inspire the book a lot, but I wouldn't want people to think of as interruptions, but that really are all part of it knit together. I feel 100% proud if someone thinks the book is suspenseful. That's not an accident. Like I definitely, like you, I'm like, yeah, how can we shape this and trim this and chisel this? And I do think that literature is a very serious form of entertainment. It's definitely an entertainment. So I do embrace that, but it's just ironic because when I started writing my first book, Oh My Darling, which I'm still quite proud of, but like, not much happens in that book, and it's more also of a meditation. And it was in one review, quite a positive review, said that it was plot deficient. It's like this wonderful and plot deficient book. And I just never forgot it. I don't know how I managed to make this sort of turn with Sea Wife, but I think that the sense of narrative propulsion is actually really secondary. My real desire is to create a fiction that's invested with meaning, that feels like it has high stakes. I'm not going to waste your time. Yeah. I don't want it to, I wouldn't only want it to be thrilling, I would also want it to be meaningful. I want it to be like a roller coaster ride. I mean, I want it to, we don't sit around thinking about like, ooh, what did that roller coaster ride mean? It's both. And the meaning, I think, in this situation, it was really, I hope it was this, invested discussion of this marriage, and the sort of suspense comes out of it because you don't know, like, what happened? Like, why, how did it go wrong? And could that be to me? Could that be me? I think that's where I love it when I'm a reader myself and I get immersed in the sense, and I bodily change places with the characters. I think that's a really cool sensation and one of the great pleasures of life and reading.
Absolutely. And you do feel that you are so much on this boat in these tight quarters with these characters. There's a storm, which I will not say anything about, but it is very thrilling. We have a question from Sarah Nisbet, who is your publicist and who helped set this up. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
She asks, not necessarily about Sea Wife, but as a writing professor and editor, how do you both think the pandemic will be incorporated into upcoming literature, or has it changed your current writing? That's a great question.
That is a great question, and Megha will be happy to start with that one. And then I'll copy what she says. Yeah.
I'm actually, I've seen people complain about, oh, there will be so many pandemic books, but I'm actually really excited about the work that will come out of this period, because I think that the good work that comes out of this period will need to grapple with systemic failures, will need to grapple with social structures which have let us down. And I think a novel can do such interesting things, or, short stories or essays, they can do such interesting things when they're thinking about the structures of society and how we move within them. So I'm really excited. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Who knows? I mean, I think that it would be reductive to start writing pandemic books about the pandemic. I think it makes more sense to write about how the pandemic made us feel and what happened to us there. And there would be lots of kind of allegorical or symbolic ways of getting at those things through different stories. To literally write pandemic fiction would seem to miss a chance. So I think one thing I really hope I'm not being too optimistic here, but I think that there's a lot of humility to be gained from our past year, and understanding many things, but certainly inequities, structural inequities in our society, and that maybe it was predictable that some people would suffer so much more than others through the pandemic, but also like a spiritual humility. Like we understand now that we are vulnerable. The pandemic made us feel vulnerable, but the truth is we were always vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
We were always mortal, and there was always a storm ahead. We just got to pretend that there wasn't. Mm-hmm. Right. So now we've seen it. We've been humbled by that. And I think it'll be good for literature, because I think it'll be because literature is when people are when they are on a quest to understand life, they're drawn to books, I think. And those books are quite capable of helping to, translate some of what's happened. I think people will be more open to admitting some of these feelings and some of these vulnerabilities, and that they might find some comfort or some response in literature. That's my optimistic hope.
I feel like you just spoke a whole beautiful essay. I love what you said about, being mortal and seeing the storm ahead, which was always there. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have just a couple minutes left, so maybe a fun way to close would be just to ask you if there's a book that you've read and loved recently.
Excuse me, I'll be back. Good thing I actually wore actual pants, right? Well, I mean, everyone has to read this. It's so beautiful if you can buy one book, buy both, especially from Books and Books or any indie store, that has, how much do we love the indie stores and how much we want them to survive all of this, this long, time away. I really love this. I've been, because of for my new, this woman is like my guru. I need to meet her. Helen MacDonald. She wrote H is for Hawk, and Vesper Flights is her new collection of essays. What a wise person. I'm also writing, my new project has to do with not just birds, but the outdoors. It's about someone hiking the Appalachian Trail who wanders off of it. So, there's a lot of nature. I've been reading a lot of nature writing and naturalism. And I also love this book too. Did you happen to read American?
I haven't read it. It's been on my list, both of them.
Anthologies. Yes. It's someone I actually know, Ed Akhtar. But I was like, I was wondering, in case you asked me that question, I was like, well, and these really, I have to say, are three of my favorite books like recently, and they're quite different. Obviously, they're different, even genres, but there's some sort of honesty and clarity in all three of them, wisdom in all three of them. So that's what I look for when I read.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for that. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming.
We love when there are book recommendations. Thank you. And those are some wonderful recommendations. So I think we have a shy audience only because you have covered so much ground and you have done it so beautifully. This was such a great pairing. What a wonderful conversation. I have enjoyed it so much. And I just want to thank you again and again for being at Books and Books. And I'd be remiss if I didn't quickly share with you that I went into lockdown on a boat with my partner, who I'm not married to, but I was a sea wife for lockdown, and it is intense. So I have not read Sea Wife yet, but I intend to read it first thing, and see what that is all about, because it is definitely challenging. But I hope to see both of you in person in Miami, maybe around the time of November for Miami Book Fair, hopefully.
Oh, that would be so
And,
I love
and
that.
again, I thank you so much for your work. Looking forward to everything that you are working on now, to what comes next. And thank you for joining us. To everyone watching from everywhere, remember you can order the book by just pressing the green button, and we'll ship it right out to you, or you can pick it up if you're in Miami. And we'll see you the next time.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Thank you,
much.
Books and Books. Thank you, Megha. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm very grateful.
Such
Good
a joy.
night, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.